Around the year 1177 BCE, the world ended, not in a single cataclysm but in a firestorm of violence that swept across the civilized world of the Eastern Mediterranean. Mighty empires that had endured for centuries, like the Hittites in the mountains of Anatolia and the palace kingdoms of the Mycenaeans in Greece, suddenly and completely collapsed. Their great capitals were burned to the ground, their literate societies vanished, and their names were all but forgotten for millennia. This was not the fall of a single city or the defeat of one army, it was the disintegration of an entire international system. In the prosperous port city of Ugarit, on the Syrian coast, a final desperate letter was found preserved in the heat of the city's destruction, its author pleading for aid against an enemy approaching from the sea. The aid never came. Ugarit was annihilated, and with it the complex network of trade routes and diplomatic channels that had bound civilizations together for generations was severed, plunging the region into a dark age. To grasp the magnitude of this catastrophe, one must first picture the world that was lost. The Late Bronze Age was, in many ways, the first great era of internationalism. A sophisticated great powers club dominated the known world, consisting of the Egyptian New Kingdom, the Hittite Empire, the Mycenaean Greeks, and the kingdoms of Babylonia and Assyria. These powers were bound by an intricate web of treaties, royal marriages, and constant diplomatic communication. This was a world connected by ambition and commerce. Great ships plied the Mediterranean, carrying copper from Cyprus and tin from the far mountains of Afghanistan, the two metals required to forge bronze, the era's most advanced military and industrial material. Kings addressed one another as equals, as brother, in letters written on clay tablets, negotiating trade rights and military alliances. It was a stable, prosperous, and deeply interconnected civilization. What force, then, could possess the power to shatter such a robust and complex world order? The answer, and the beginning of our mystery, is carved into the stone walls of a massive temple in Egypt. At Medinet Habu, the Pharaoh Ramesses III commissioned a grand monument to celebrate his reign, and its primary focus was his victory over a mysterious coalition of invaders who, the inscriptions claim, had laid waste to all lands in their path before reaching the borders of Egypt. The Egyptian records give these enigmatic aggressors a collective name, the peoples of the sea. Ramesses boasts of annihilating their forces in a great land and sea battle, casting them as a tide of chaos that only his divine strength could turn back. His account is the most detailed we possess, yet it is also the source of the profound mystery, presenting a clear enemy but offering almost no explanation for their existence or their motives. But these carvings must be understood not as objective history, but as masterful war propaganda. The reliefs at Medinet Habu are designed to project an image of absolute Egyptian power and pharaonic authority. The invaders are depicted as a chaotic, undifferentiated mass, while Ramesses is shown as a heroic, larger-than-life figure, single-handedly defending civilization. The narrative serves the state, framing a complex historical event as a simple story of good versus evil, order versus chaos. A closer examination of the reliefs, however, reveals details that complicate this simple narrative. The artists carefully distinguished between the different tribes of the Sea Peoples, most famously the Peliset, depicted with their distinctive feathered headdresses, and the Shurden, with their horned helmets. More telling still, the carvings show not only warriors, but also their families, women and children riding in heavy ox carts. This was not merely a raiding party. It was a people on the move, a mass migration driven by desperation. This leads to the central, unsolved riddle. Where did they come from? For over a century, this question has haunted historians and archaeologists. The Egyptian texts provide a list of tribal names: the Peliset, the Cheker, the Shekelesh, the Denyen, the Weshesh, but no clear homeland. They appeared as if from nowhere, a storm gathering on the horizon of the known world, before breaking upon its shores. Scholars have advanced numerous theories, attempting to link these names to known peoples and places. The Shurden have been tentatively connected to Sardinia, the Shekelesh to Sicily, and the Denyen to the Danans, one of the names used for the Greeks in Homer's epics. These connections are tantalizing, suggesting a vast upheaval across the central and eastern Mediterranean. Yet, they remain hypotheses, educated guesses based on the faint echoes of names. The true origins of the Sea Peoples are a blank map, a testament to the profound darkness that fell upon the world they helped to unmake. Beyond the grand pronouncements of pharaohs, the hard, silent evidence of history is written in the earth itself. Across the eastern Mediterranean, archaeologists find a clear, violent scar in the geological record, a dark band of ash and rubble known as a destruction layer. This layer marks the abrupt end of the Late Bronze Age, a physical testament to a world torn apart by fire and sword. It is the archaeological footprint of a catastrophe. At the Syrian port of Ugarit, a once thriving cosmopolitan hub, this evidence is chillingly specific. Cuneiform tablets were found still baking in the kilns where they were being fired when the city was sacked. One tablet, a desperate letter from Ugarit's king, pleads for aid from a neighboring kingdom, stating, "My father, behold, the enemy's ships came. They have set fire to my towns and have done evil things in my country. The help never arrived." This pattern of ruin is not an isolated incident. It is a devastating map of collapse stretching from the Hittite capital of Hattusa in Anatolia to the fortified palaces of Mycenaean in Greece and across the islands of the Aegean. Great cities, centers of learning, power, and commerce for centuries, were not just conquered. They were obliterated, many never to be inhabited again. The synchronization of this widespread destruction points to a force of unprecedented scale and ferocity. This raises a profound and troubling question that challenges the very foundation of the traditional narrative. Could a disparate coalition of sea raiders, however fierce, truly be responsible for the simultaneous collapse of multiple powerful land-based empires? The simplicity of the explanation begins to fray when confronted with the reality of the world they supposedly destroyed. Consider the immense power of their victims. The Hittite Empire commanded a formidable professional army, masters of chariot warfare who had fought the Egyptians to a standstill. The Mycenaean Greeks built their palaces within massive cyclopean walls, fortifications so enormous that later generations believed they were built by giants. These were not fragile states, but hardened military powers, the superpowers of their day. The modern, more compelling explanation is that of a system's collapse. This powerful concept reframes the entire event. In this view, the Sea Peoples were not the primary cause of the collapse, but rather a symptom of a civilization already in crisis, and a final brutal accelerant that pushed a teetering world over the edge. The Bronze Age world was a complex, interconnected system, and like all such systems, it contained the seeds of its own undoing. This changes our understanding of power and ambition entirely. The raiders were not giants felling healthy trees, they were scavengers capitalizing on a dying forest. The great empires were already hollowed out from within, their strength a brittle facade. The Sea Peoples became the final, decisive shock that shattered a system which had lost its resilience. The intricate web of the Late Bronze Age was its greatest strength and its most fatal weakness. Empires from Egypt to Mesopotamia were linked by elaborate trade routes, dependent on one another for essential resources like the tin and copper needed to make bronze. This globalization created immense wealth, but it also meant that a crisis in one region could send catastrophic shockwaves throughout the entire system. The first of these great stressors was environmental. Scientific evidence drawn from sources like ancient pollen analysis and Greenland ice cores points to a severe, prolonged climate event beginning around 1250 BCE. This was a mega drought that lasted for decades, altering weather patterns and causing sustained agricultural failure across the Near East. The consequences of this climate shift were immediate and devastating. Year after year, harvests failed, leading to widespread famine. An empire, no matter how grand its ambitions or powerful its army, cannot function without food. The granaries emptied, tax revenues plummeted, and the very foundations of centralized power began to crumble as starving populations grew restless and desperate. Beyond the strain of a changing climate, a second, more insidious stressor was at work. An economic breakdown rooted in the very material that defined the age. The great empires ran on bronze, an alloy of copper and tin. Yet these two metals were rarely found together. The copper might come from Cyprus, while the tin had to be painstakingly transported from the distant mountains of what is now Afghanistan. The entire military and economic machine, from the king's chariot to the farmer's sickle, depended on these vast, fragile supply chains stretching across thousands of miles. As droughts intensified and social order frayed, these vital arteries of commerce began to clog, then sever. A single failed caravan or a pirated shipment could halt weapon production for an entire kingdom. This created a devastating feedback loop. The lack of bronze weakened armies, which made trade routes even more dangerous. Economic collapse fueled popular unrest, which in turn shattered the remaining structures of trade. The very foundation of Bronze Age power was dissolving, not from a single blow, but from 1,000 points of failure across its interconnected network. Picture for a moment the striking parallels to our own time. The late Bronze Age collapse serves as a profound warning from history, a case study in the vulnerability of a globalized system. The same interconnectedness that fostered immense wealth and cultural exchange became its greatest weakness. Their world, like ours, was a complex web of dependencies where a crisis in one region could trigger a cascade of failures across the entire civilized world. It demonstrates a timeless principle: complexity is not the same as resilience. The end, when it came, was not the result of a single cause, but a convergence of crises. Imagine a structure weakened by years of drought, its foundations eroded by economic decay, and its pillars shaken by internal rebellion. The Sea Peoples were not the earthquake that brought this structure down. They were the final, powerful tremor that shattered a civilization already on the brink of collapse. They were the symptom of a dying world, the human face of a system-wide failure. In the aftermath, a period of profound societal decline swept across the eastern Mediterranean. Great cities were abandoned to the elements, their populations scattered into smaller, isolated villages. The intricate art of writing, once the tool of palace scribes, was lost in many regions. The sophisticated Linear B script of the Mycenaeans vanished entirely from the historical record. But this was not merely an ending. It was a hard reset, a violent clearing of the board that would allow new players and new systems to emerge from the ruins. From this power vacuum, a different world began to take shape. The collapse of the old, rigid, and highly centralized palace economies created opportunities for smaller, more adaptable groups. On the Levantine coast, the Phoenicians rose to become masters of the sea, their nimble ships forging new trade networks. In the hills of Canaan, new identities like the early Israelites began to form. The end of the Bronze Age, catastrophic as it was, created the necessary space for the birth of the Iron Age and the civilizations that would define it. And what of the Sea Peoples themselves, the enigmatic catalysts of this transformation? Their story did not end with their defeat at the hands of Ramesses III. The most clearly identified group among them, the Peliset, were not annihilated. Instead, they were settled by the victorious Egyptians along the southern coast of Canaan. There, they established new cities, bringing with them their own technologies and traditions. Over generations, these Peliset warriors and their families assimilated with the local populations, their culture blending with that of the Levant. They became a new people, a formidable power in the region. History would come to know them by a different name. The Philistines, the supposed destroyers of civilization, had, in a final, ironic turn, become nation-builders, their legacy woven into the very fabric of the new era they helped to create. The mystery of the Sea Peoples, then, was never truly about finding a lost homeland on a map. The deeper question was always how an entire constellation of brilliant civilizations could so utterly and completely disappear. The answer, we now understand, is that civilizations are not monoliths of stone, but fragile systems of connection. They are intricate machines of trade, diplomacy, and belief. The Sea Peoples did not single-handedly break that machine. They were the final, decisive blow that shattered a mechanism already strained to its breaking point.